Hey, it's Jack, no K, Jack in the attic, and I've been up to some stuff. I'm not over yarn dyeing. It's fun, and I'm having fun, and I wanted to dye more yarn. So here is my next attempt at yarn dyeing. A few things have changed. Pretty crucially, I got that big rectangular pan that I showed at the very end of my last video. I've taken a few more safety precautions. Now that I'm doing this as like voiceover or reaction to the footage, I was able to have the fan on like all the time. I'm running 3 air purifiers at all times, windows open, etc. Cat's not anywhere near it, all of that type of stuff. I'm still doing it in my kitchen. That is truly my only option. But I'm definitely doing a better job putting everything food prep away. And then I end up doing a lot of cleaning and washing stuff afterwards anyway. So this is my next attempt. I'm going to sort of talk through everything as it's happening on screen. I have my laptop here. So sorry if I'm looking down a whole lot. This is just going to be a little video in the corner anyway, so I'll try to stay out of the way. I did also try to make sure that the dyeing process itself was much more visible this time. Last time the angle was just like not conducive to really showing the process, but I also had no idea what I was doing, so there wasn't a whole lot to show. Anyway, this time I tried to really make sure everything was visible. So let's get started. So off camera, as I was getting everything set up, I let the 3 skeins of yarn. This is Knit Picks Swish fingering weight yarn. It's 100% superwash merino. I was letting that soak in water. I put about a half teaspoon of citric acid per skein in the soaking water, knowing that I was going to use some of that water to put in this pan. And I did go ahead and mix up the dye off camera. At this point, I couldn't tell you the dye ratios. I should have written it down, but I was like, oh, but I'm gonna film it, so I won't have to. No, didn't film that part. That and my scale would not pick up such tiny quantities, so I only know how many of these rusty baby spoons worth of dye I put in. So I am fitting 3 skeins into this pan. I am just kind of laying them in a little tiny bit of water and smooshing them around, trying to get them as flat as possible, but also having a lot of bumps and ridges to catch dye. The plan for this set of 3 skeins is mostly black with a big section of red and then gray in between the black and red sections. And then I'm using this measuring cup to move some of the soaking water that already has the citric acid in it to the pan. This took a little bit of trial and error, as you can see. It's kind of a lot of work to get it as imperfect as I wanted. So I put this clip on the edge of the pan so that I could, really it was so I could keep the extra long loops of cotton yarn from touching the burner in the back. It's good to keep track of them, yes. Most people use zip ties. I know that there are some in my home, but I don't know where they are. So it's cotton yarn for now. And I haven't had a problem with that. So here I'm turning the burners on. I went for about medium low so that this could heat up slowly. I know shocking the yarn, exposing it to a greater temperature change rapidly is not good for any yarn, but it's less of a concern with superwash yarn. So here I am adding more hot water to this jar of black dye. The jars were a good idea for mixing, but they're not a good idea for pouring. You'll see it go sort of badly, and then I figure out a solution later. And here I hesitate, and that's a terrible idea. Here I'm hesitating more, and it did me no favors. You can really see my arm hair in this light. That's great. So the idea was the top and the bottom was going to do pretty big sections of black. That dish towel I had already ruined with fabric dye. Here I am going back in trying to get to the edge of the pan because that first pour was just pretty messy. You will also see that there are some stray dots in the center section that I didn't mean to add, but I will go in and add more to make it consistent. And I'm actually glad I did this because those ended up being really dark spots in the red, and it looks really cool, so no regrets there. I'm using those tongs to move the dye around, get it into all of the spots that it didn't reach initially, just trying to get everything sort of consistent. Going in with the spoon to add those dots to make everything look intentional. Isn't this a fun experience to be watching my video together? We're both seeing this. Not for the first time, but I haven't watched this since I did the editing process half asleep at like 1 a.m. This was my easiest video to edit ever because it's all silent, so I didn't have to cut out me saying anything silly or sniffing really loud. Spring has sprung and I am resentful in an allergy sense. I forgot to say that was Jacquard acid dye in jet black. This is Jacquard acid dye in russet, which is this beautiful deep red color. I've had kind of a hard time determining the exact shades from the Knit Picks website, but this color was everything I wanted and more. So you'll see there's a little bit of white in between the red and black. That is intentional. That's where the gray is going. I'm adding a little bit more water to that jar just to get the very last bits of dye out. I had a little bit of trouble on that side. Okay, so you can kind of see the steam rising. So we had been waiting for the temperature to get up there before adding the dye. And so this whole process was already hot. The adding the dye part, did that make any sense? I waited for it to heat up, then added the dye. But it did continue to heat as I was adding the dye and after. So we're going in with the gray. I'm trying to be very intentional here. Every time I see myself hesitate now, I'm like, I know how this yarn turns out and I think it's cool. So looking back, I'm like, Don't worry, it's gonna be okay. So as you can see, every time I place a spoonful of the gray dye, I sort of smush it around and try to get it deeper into the stack of yarn, really. It's a pretty thick pile of yarn. Just doing the same thing on the other side. This smushing around with the spoon also helps me see if there are any really blank spots just in the area that I'm moving the yarn around. And if there are, I add some extra gray dye. So the black, gray, red gradient is intentional, but the gray was also very convenient to just cover up any sort of bald spots is not the right term I'm looking for here, but bald spots. Okay, so going back in with the tongs, you can kind of see that I am moving the red further away from the black on the side closest to me so that I can access more of that gray section. Later, I will sort of smoosh all the red into like a ridge in the center so that everything else is a little more spaced out and I can see more of the black and gray yarn to be able to add dye where it's needed. Now I'm going around looking for more blank spots. I am going to flip these over and do the same thing on the other side, but doing as much as I can from one side does make it easier. I do this part for a really long time, honestly, just until I run out of gray dye. And when you're doing that with a little baby spoon, it takes quite a while. It looks like I did leave a little tiny bit left. Once again, going in with the tongs. I probably didn't need to do as much wiggling the yarn around as I did, but I wasn't worried about felting just from movement because this is superwash. Okay, so the yarn has been sitting and heating for quite a while at this point. The clock is now out of frame, so I couldn't tell you exactly how long, probably 10 to 15 minutes. What I'm looking for as I move the yarn away from the side of the pan is for the water to be clear. I did give it another few minutes after that because on the right side, I have now flipped the pan, so the right side is the left side, but on what was the right side, there was still a little bit of pink. So I gave it a few more minutes, and now I'm flipping everything over. It is looking pretty good. It feels like I got a good amount of dye through that first side. It is harder to flip these than it is to lay them in the first place because all of the yarn that can fit in the pan is already in the pan. I learned this trick of squeezing the water out with the tongs, plural, from Chem Knits, who does a bunch of yarn dyeing videos here on YouTube. I'm looking up her channel to make sure. Yes, Chem Knits Tutorials. Love her. Moving the clip to the other side. I forgot to mention why I did turn the pan, really just for even heat distribution. So maybe this angle isn't 100% better, but I think it's certainly better than the last yarn dyeing video. We're learning. This is a new process for me. It's sort of rare that I record me doing something in the moment rather than just talking about it after the fact. You can also see to the left there, I have already mixed up a new batch of dyes. And I keep bringing them over here to show the camera, and I don't think I actually show the camera at any point. So I'm gonna tell you, it's jet black, russet, and silver gray, all from Jacquard acid dyes. So here's what I was talking about before, where I'm moving the red section all as dense as I can in the center to form kind of a ridge. I guess I could have done this in the first place on the other side so that the black dye doesn't want to travel too much, which really didn't happen. What this does do is expose more of the undyed yarn in the black and gray section so that I can focus on that before dyeing the red section. Here I found a plastic Halloween cup that I had used as a paint water cup. I have and still do use as a paint water cup. So this has nothing to do with food. It's never going to touch food. And this was a great idea. Pouring from this smaller container that is flexible was so much easier. So I do absolutely recommend that. Definitely over a big glass pasta sauce jar anyway. After this, I did go ahead and purchase some large plastic medicine syringes, the 60 milliliter type, so that I can place dye even more accurately. So I think that will be helpful in my next experiment, which I can go ahead and tell you is going to be black into kind of a sunset gradient with orange and magenta and purple. And it's not for me, but I'm very excited to do it. Knowing other crafters is very helpful. In this exact instance, it's letting me experiment with colors that I wouldn't normally make for myself. Yeah, the only time I get to knit in color is when I'm making something for someone else. This is much like that. So I have added the black dye, as you can see. That cup was so helpful, I can't even explain. As I add more and more dye, you can see the water level is coming up a little bit. This does end up being kind of helpful in sort of making sure everything is more even, I think, I suspect. So I'm going in with the gray. I don't know what that was. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going in with the black and I'm adding more speckles into the red section. And the heat was up a little too high if you saw that. Small spray of hot boiling water come up through the yarn. I should be turning the heat down here. I'm not doing that. I'm doing something else instead. I'm adding the red. Safety first, kids. All right, so I did go ahead and flatten that red section back out, so when I pour the dye onto it, it gets everywhere. I really can't emphasize enough how gorgeous this red color is. It's called Russet. It's the only red I have worked with, but now I'm like, what do I need other reds for? There's Russet. Now I'm going in with the gray. It is a little harder to see where the gray is supposed to be going now that the water level is so much higher. But once again, everything turns out fine in the end. I did have slight concerns early on that the red and the silver gray mixing might turn a little bit purple. What I did before dyeing was mix a tiny bit of russet and a tiny bit of silver gray in a jar with a little bit of water and dipped just a little strip of white paper towel into it to see what color it turned into. And it did not look too purple, so I wasn't too scared after that. The gray really does look like it leans a little bit purple, but in person, it's really not. It's still definitely cool tone, for sure. But it doesn't look blue, it doesn't look purple. It really does look gray. I don't know how it would look if you use the gray on its own. I haven't done that. I've only used this gray mixed with other colors, so I can see this gray in this context exclusively. Maybe if you dyed it solid gray, it may be a little bit blue or purple. I'm not sure. So doing a lot of this, doing a lot of moving yarn around and figuring out where there are little spots I can add more gray to. As you can see, I'm kind of lifting sections with the spoon to get a better look. The tricky thing I've noticed with using black and gray in the same skeins is things that are already dyed gray look like things that are just sitting in black dye and not taking the dye. They look quite the same. So going in with the remaining black dye. This was over a week ago, so I'm remembering the process as I'm watching it. That's why a couple things have been a little bit incorrect. And then I see and I'm able to correct myself. So I'm assuming what I'm doing with the leftover black dye is I'm going to go in looking for little spots that need it. Looks like that's what's happening, yes. In my last video, I was pretty concerned about the water getting to a low simmer or near a simmer. I thought that was bad. But then I saw other yarn dyeing videos where the water is very nearly boiling and the yarn did not suffer for that. So I got a little more comfortable with this gentle simmer that's happening in some places. And off camera, while the yarn was sitting, I was able to take some hot pads and really flip the whole thing around. I had kind of two corners sitting on the burners, then I would switch and have the other two corners sitting on the burners. I tried to get an even distribution of the heat as much as possible because they are just two regular old stove burners under this rectangular pan. So there was really no way it was going to be even unless I intervened. And even then, still definitely not even, but it's probably better than nothing. I have heard of people doing this entire process cold and then putting the whole pan in the oven for a little while. I don't know temperature or timing on that. I would have to look more into that. I would be afraid of dumping dye in my oven. So I let that sit for another 10-15, it may have been even 20 minutes. I really wanted to make sure all the dye had been absorbed. I think this time I added a little bit more citric acid too after the first 10 or so minutes. Pretty sure I added more because there was still quite a bit of dye that was not absorbed yet. So I also learned that trick where you twist the skein around the tongs to twist the water out from Chemnitz. I've been watching a lot of Chemnitz. Here I'm trying and failing multiple times to get this loop of yarn to hang over the side. It really was not that important. Doing the second skein, I get kind of nervous that the skeins get all kind of loopy like that. Makes me think they're gonna be really tangled and everything when they hang up to dry, but that kind of just works itself out as they dry, hanging up. So it is much like if you have really straight hair. I have really straight hair and I wash my hair. There is absolutely no way I can brush my hair when it's wet. But then when it dries, it's like, oh, okay, fine. This is like that, if you have that very specific experience. So on camera, it's looking like there are blank spots, but I know in reality that has to be gray because I've seen the finished skeins. So let's all keep an open mind here. I'm talking to myself. I should keep an open mind here. I'm pretty sure that's gray. So I went ahead and washed them. This was the outcome. Of course, not dried yet. Someone just drove by on a motorcycle playing Shake, Rattle, and Roll really loud. So yeah, at this point, before seeing the dried yarn, I am stoked about how it's looking. So let's talk about it. So I didn't have much time to talk about the washing process. Basically, I waited for the yarn to cool down quite a bit because once again, you don't want to shock it with a rapid temperature change. Even though it's superwash, I did take that consideration just to be safe. So at that point, with the yarn cooled down, I gave it like a 10-minute soak in just plain water. And then I used a couple drops of dish soap, kind of swoosh that around a little bit, let it soak for a few minutes, and then a rinse, and then another 10-ish minute soak in plain water, and then I hung them up to dry. So I'm having to find creative solutions to hang these up to dry because I really don't have a good place to do that. So don't ask me for recommendations on that. I don't have that. So the important part, the finished yarn, we have this skein. We have this skein. I actually really like these sections where the red and the gray overlap. There is a little bit of like barely dyed yarn there, but it actually looks really cool with the gray. I feel like it looks intentional, and I don't think I'm deluding myself this time. It could be. There's some gray. Yeah. Here they are next to each other. I think they match each other pretty well. I had some concerns about that, obviously, as a beginner dyer, but I think they really work. And I know you're saying, oh, you dyed 3 skeins, where's the third one? Well, I already caked it up. This is what it looks like in the cake. You can really see the gray coming through. That makes me so excited. And I swatched it. This is still very much attached to the yarn ball. So here is the swatch. It ended up being a little bit, not fully self-striping, but a little stripy. I love the gray spots. I love, honestly, everything about this. It is not like this perfect black and gray solid chunks of distinct colors. I love the gradient element. I love the little spots of gray. I just think it looks so cool. I do wonder what it would look like in crochet because the sections of color would show up shorter. I should swatch that too. But anyway, this is where we're at. I've already said this, but I'm having the best time. I think yarn dyeing is so much fun. I have another package showing up soon, but that one is not for me. I've made a little deal that benefits everyone where I will gain some experience by dyeing custom colorways for friends, and they just buy the yarn and a little bit of the dye. That's going to happen on sort of an extremely limited basis, but it is fun. It's fun in concept. I haven't done it yet. The yarn is in the mail. Anyway, that is to say I am absolutely going to keep dyeing yarn, and thank goodness I have some crafty friends so I can practice and keep practicing without growing my stash too terribly much. So I'm already at 7 skeins. But I did cast something off yesterday, so I'm gonna cast on something soon. Get one of these things going, we'll see. My plan with this, because I have 3 skeins of it, is some sort of long-sleeved layering piece. Maybe a long-sleeved like crop top or something. I'm not sure how much yarn you need for a long-sleeve full-length top, but if it's for layering anyway, it's totally fine if it's cropped. And then I definitely have to make another one of these to make a hat for my partner because these are the correct colors. If you've seen the tank top I'm making for my partner's birthday, it's in these colors. Basically everything I make for my partner is red and black, Halloween colors for my benefit, or high vis. Whatever yarn brand made the high vis yarn, if you could start making it again, that would be weird. That would be weird. I don't know if you should do that. I actually have plenty left over. Leave in the comments, what should I make with high vis yarn? I have like 3 skeins of it. I don't know. So you may have noticed that I am filming this in the loudest part of the day, so if that has been a huge disruption, I am so sorry. If it has been a huge enough disruption that it bothers me a lot in the editing process, I'll scrap this whole thing and start over. Don't think I won't. Anyway, thank you for joining me on my second, I'm calling this my second yarn dyeing experience, despite the title of my last video. My second yarn dyeing experience, not my second time dyeing yarn, right? Does that make sense? I don't know. Anyway, tell me what you would make with 3 skeins of this. I am interested. I'm not fully sold on the long sleeve top yet. Thank you for hanging out with me. I will see you in the next one. Don't breathe any dye powder. Go live your best yarny life. And I already said I will see you next time, messing up my own outro once again. Bye.